Security humiliates Filipino pilot at the airport, but journalist exposes the prejudice and makes it go viral. The rhythmic murmur of the terminal echoed beneath the domed ceilings of Liberty International Airport. Rolling suitcases clacked against the tiled floor, punctuated by automated boarding announcements that dissolved into static. The scent of roasted espresso mingled with jet fuel that wafted faintly through the reinforced glass near Gate C-18. Travelers, each moving with a purpose tethered to time zones and itineraries, streamed in every direction like veins pulsing through a living organism. Amid the crowd, a man in his early 60s wove his way forward with a quiet, grounded assurance. He wore a simple navy polo shirt, dark jeans pressed to crisp lines, and clean white sneakers. A leather messenger bag hung diagonally across his torso, worn but cared for. His salt and pepper hair was neatly cropped, and a thin, silver watch hugged his wrist. No insignia, no epaulets, no ID badge visible at first glance. He could have been a consultant, a professor, a retiree. To most passers-by, he was simply another body in transit. But he was none of those things. Captain Rafael "Rafi" del Rosario had logged over 23,000 hours in the air. He had flown trans-Pacific and transatlantic routes, navigated systems failures at 40,000 feet, led investigations that redefined cockpit response protocols, and consulted for NASA on atmospheric safety anomalies. If aviation had royalty, Rafi would be its quiet monarch, respected, not flashy, revolutionary, not loud. Today, he wasn't flying a jet. He was flying under the radar. He glanced at his phone. 9:46 a.m. The Aviation and Safety Futures Conference was scheduled to begin in less than 2 hours, and he was due to open the first panel discussion with a keynote titled Redesigning Trust, Cockpits, Cultures, and Human Factors. As he approached the escalators leading up to the Skycrew Lounge, reserved for licensed flight crew and industry veterans, he exhaled calmly. No rush. As Rafi stepped toward the frosted glass doors of the lounge, he reached into his bag and withdrew his ID wallet, flipping it open with ease. The badge inside bore the golden seal of the Federal Aviation Administration, his pilot certification, and the distinctive logo of Lahore Airways, where he had most recently served as Chief Safety Officer before retiring from regular flight rotations. He held it up instinctively toward the security kiosk near the entrance. "Sir?" came a voice, firm, not loud, but charged with challenge. Rafi turned his head slowly. A tall security officer stepped away from his post. His badge read, Officer Liam Carter. He had the build of a linebacker and a haircut with military precision. His gaze scanned Rafi not with curiosity, but suspicion, calculated. His hand hovered near the holster on his hip, though he made no motion to draw it. "Can I help you?" Rafi asked, his voice steady and mild. "This is a restricted area," Carter said, eyes narrowing. "Crew and airline personnel only." "I'm aware," Rafi replied. "I'm Captain Del Rosario, here for the conference. You can verify the badge if needed." Carter didn't glance at the ID. Instead, he folded his arms. "You said you're a captain?" "Yes." "Captain of what, exactly?" Rafi didn't flinch. "Commercial aviation. Lahore Airways. I'm a panelist for." "Do you have a uniform? Crew card? Credentials from today's airline?" "I'm not flying today. Just attending the conference. My FAA certification is right here." Carter finally reached for the wallet, flipping it open. He studied the badge with a raised brow. "This looks unorthodox," he muttered. "I've seen a lot of these, and this one just doesn't seem. I don't know." "Right. It's issued by the FAA and fully valid." "Where did you say you were from again?" "I didn't. But I live in San Mateo, California." Carter's nostrils flared subtly. "Mind stepping aside for additional screening?" Passengers began to slow down near the lounge as the exchange drew subtle attention. Rafi glanced at the growing eyes around him. Curious, confused, some even bemused. He sighed. "Officer, with respect, I'd appreciate it if you simply scanned the badge and verified it through your system. There's no need for escalation. I'll be the judge of that." Just then, a woman in a tan blazer emerged from the lounge. She held a leather-bound notebook, a press badge, and a pair of tinted glasses perched on her head. Her auburn hair was pulled into a practical bun. She stopped mid-step as she recognized the scene before her. "Wait, is that—" "Excuse me," she called, stepping closer. "Is there a problem here?" Carter barely turned. This doesn't concern you, miss. The woman raised her press badge. Laura Stevens, senior correspondent for Aviation News Network. It absolutely does concern me if you're detaining Captain Rafael del Rosario. Carter froze. You know him? Laura smiled thinly. That man is a living legend in our field. He redesigned the standard operating procedures after the Singapore 823 incident. He was on the investigation team for the Alaska decompression. He personally trained half the safety leads at today's conference. And you're what? Accusing him of what exactly? Carter looked at Rafi again, this time with something resembling uncertainty. Rafi's gaze remained even. He hadn't raised his voice once, hadn't made a single sudden movement. But in that moment, his calm demeanor cut through the air like a scalpel. I think, Laura added, voice rising slightly, you might want to call your supervisor. Immediately, Carter hesitated, then tapped his radio. Dispatch, this is Officer Carter. I need verification assistance at Sky Crew Lounge. Subject ID says Del Rosario, Rafael. Claims FAA credential. A long pause. Static. Then, copy, Carter. Hold position. Director Hayes is en route. It was only a few minutes, but the wait felt cavernous. Every second ticked with the weight of unsaid questions and the undercurrent of shame hanging in the air. The small crowd had grown. Smartphones were out. Recording. Then came the sharp click of polished shoes on tile. Martin Hayes, the director of airport operations, approached with deliberate haste. A distinguished man with graying temples and sharp eyes. He took one look at Rafi and broke into a look of mortified recognition. Captain Del Rosario, he said, extending his hand. My deepest apologies. I came as soon as I heard. Please, come in. We have your access credentials ready and the conference team is expecting you. Rafi shook his hand politely. Hayes turned to Carter, voice icy. Officer Carter, step into my office when your shift ends. We'll be discussing appropriate conduct with certified personnel. Carter nodded stiffly, his jaw clenched. As Hayes led Rafi and Laura through the glass doors, cameras still recorded. The footage was uploaded before they reached the elevator. By the time they arrived at the mezzanine, the first hashtags were already trending. Hashtag respect Rafi. Hashtag he is the pilot. Hashtag end airport bias. And outside, in the terminal that never truly slept, something had been disrupted, not just a routine, but a system of assumptions long left unchallenged. Even before stepping onto a runway for the first time, Rafi del Rosario had spent years watching the sky with the reverence of a poet. He was the son of Filipino immigrants who worked double shifts in Daly City. His mother a hospital technician, his father a janitor at San Francisco International Airport. Their dreams weren't adorned with luxury. They were practical, small, survival-sized. Yet they carved out just enough space to nurture their son's fascination with flight. At age 9, Rafi built his first cockpit from cardboard boxes. By 16, he was reading flight manuals borrowed from a retired neighbor. He cleaned hangars in exchange for short lessons with Cessna pilots. He remembered every call sign, every glide path, every mistake. Still, no amount of excellence shielded him from the recurring skepticism he met once he entered the formal world of commercial aviation. You sure you're in the right briefing room? You're the captain? Where's the real one? You speak English very well. He never raised his voice, never retaliated. But he remembered. He logged those moments like wind resistance, quiet forces that, over time, wore at the fuselage of his faith in people. Years later, after safely landing a malfunctioning 787 Dreamliner with only partial avionics, a journalist called him the pilot who never panics. The nickname stuck, but it missed the point. It wasn't that Rafi never panicked. It was that panic, in his world, was a luxury. If he panicked, people died. Back in the Sky Crew Lounge, a silence hovered over the room as Laura Stevens sat across from him, still processing what she had just witnessed. I wish I could say I was surprised, she said quietly. But I'm not. Rafi stirred the coffee in front of him without drinking it. It's not the first time, he replied. Won't be the last. But this was different. It was public. It was recorded. Rafi met her gaze. And that makes it real. It makes it undeniable, she said. That matters. He nodded, though something in his posture stiffened. Not resentment, weariness. Not defeat, acceptance. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Do you want to go on record? Speak about it. I came here to talk about cockpit protocols, not social justice. Captain, she said gently. Today, they became the same thing. The opening ceremony of the Aviation and Safety Futures Conference took place in Hall A, a grand expanse of glass and steel, filled with rows of folding chairs and tension banners displaying phrases like innovation in turbulence and the future is human. Engineers, analysts, pilots, policymakers. Everyone in aviation who mattered was here. Rafi stood backstage, a small headset clipped behind his ear. The incident with Officer Carter still clung to him like an oil stain, mostly invisible, but felt. He'd declined the green room snacks. He wasn't hungry. He wasn't nervous either. What he felt was more complicated than stage fright. It was the tightening awareness that what happened that morning had already altered the meaning of this talk, without his consent. The host, a smooth-talking moderator from CNN Aviation, introduced him with appropriate fanfare. A man whose innovations have saved lives in the air and reshaped protocols on the ground. Please welcome Captain Rafael Del Rosario. Applause. Rafi stepped onto the stage. His presentation slides flickered onto the massive screen behind him. Technical diagrams, procedural overviews, AI-assisted co-pilot developments. He had practiced the opening a dozen times. But standing there now, staring out into the vast audience, faces of every shade, gender, and uniform, he felt an internal shift. He turned off the remote and faced the crowd. I came here to talk about system redundancies and cockpit redesigns, he began. But I need to speak, for a moment, about something less mechanical, more human. The room quieted. This morning, I was stopped by a security officer who didn't believe I could be a pilot. Not because of any security failure, but because I didn't look the part. A ripple of discomfort passed through the audience. He had no idea who I was. That's not the issue. The issue is that what he saw told him I couldn't belong. He paused. In the air, if a gauge doesn't read properly, we investigate. We calibrate. We don't ignore it. And when we find a systemic flaw, we redesign the system. Now they were listening. Inclusion isn't about appearances or diversity brochures. It's about recognizing who we fail to believe, who we fail to see, as part of our safety culture. The silence became reverent. He clicked to the next slide. A cockpit schematic. And now, back to design. Meanwhile, across terminals and time zones, the video of Rafi being stopped outside the lounge had gone viral. TikTok clips layered his calm voice with incredulous narration. Twitter/X exploded with side-by-side comparisons. What they think a pilot looks like versus what a legend actually looks like. Facebook threads emerged from former crew members recounting Rafi's influence on their training. LinkedIn posts reframed the incident as a case study in unconscious bias. At Lahri Airways headquarters, PR staff scrambled to prepare a press statement. At the airport, Officer Liam Carter sat alone in the break room. His phone buzzed repeatedly. Notifications piled up, unread. He stared blankly at the screen, then swiped it off. He replayed the moment in his mind. The man's calmness, the silence of the crowd, the voice of the journalist. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't cursed. And still, Carter's authority had withered in the presence of something undeniable. Back at the conference, Rafi stepped down from the stage to a standing ovation. Not a polite round of claps. A full, sustained wave of applause. Pilots, engineers, journalists, even rivals. Not for the man he had been before, but for the man who, despite it all, still spoke with dignity. Laura met him backstage with eyes glossy but proud. You just changed the tone of this entire event, she whispered. Rafi exhaled. No, he said. The tone was always there. I just stopped tuning it out. By nightfall, the footage had amassed over 4 million views. It wasn't just the virality. It was the commentary that followed. Pilots from different countries weighed in. Industry experts. Cabin crew. People of color in every profession who had lived the same look of doubt, the same invisible suspicion that clung to them like turbulence without warning. The headline on Aviation News Network read, Legendary pilot detained by airport security. Racial profiling in the skies? Rafi's inbox overflowed. Mostly support, some rage, a few invitations to set the record straight on morning shows. He declined them all. In a hotel room just 6 blocks from the conference center, he sat at the edge of the bed, the TV muted, staring out the window. Below, the city lights blinked like old aircraft signals, familiar and distant. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. There was no joy in vindication, no triumph in going viral. The incident had ruptured something deeper, not only in him, but in the system he had worked his entire life to strengthen. What good were new protocols if old prejudices still boarded every day? A soft knock on the door interrupted the silence. It was Laura, holding 2 paper cups of chamomile tea. She stepped in without asking. He didn't stop her. "You're trending on 7 platforms," she said, sitting opposite him. "I figured. People are calling you the Rosa Parks of aviation." Rafi winced. "I'm not interested in sainthood." "I know," she said, "but you may not get a choice." They sipped in silence for a moment. "Do you think Carter knew who you were?" she asked. "No, and it wouldn't have mattered if he did." She looked at him, curious. "Because this wasn't about me," he explained. "It was about the idea of me. A man who looked like that, casual clothes, brown skin, immigrant face, claiming access to a space he didn't believe I belonged in." He placed the cup down. "And the fact that I am a captain only makes the story newsworthy. But if I weren't?" Laura nodded slowly. "Then it would have stayed invisible." Officer Liam Carter stared at the screen in the HR office. The video played on loop. His stance, his tone, the words he used, his refusal to validate the badge. "I've seen a lot of these, and this one just doesn't seem right." He didn't need to hear it again. It was all over the internet. His own body language. The subtext now dissected in 1,000 think pieces. The posture of entitlement. The skeptical tilt of the head. The refusal to acknowledge authority when it comes in an unexpected form. Carter sat with his hands clasped tightly, knuckles white. He wasn't a rookie. He had 15 years on the job. 2 commendations. But none of that buffered the tidal wave crashing down now. The door opened. Director Martin Hayes entered, setting a folder on the desk without sitting down. "We're issuing a public statement," he said curtly. "You are being placed on temporary suspension. Effective immediately." Carter stiffened. "Without pay. 2 weeks. Pending mandatory retraining." "On what?" "Cultural sensitivity. De-escalation. Implicit bias." Carter's jaw twitched. "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't touch him. I followed procedure." "No," Hayes said, his voice dropping. "You followed your version of procedure. You ignored federal credentials. You questioned someone's right to be in a space they had every legal and professional right to access. And worse, you did it in public. In front of witnesses. In front of a journalist." "It was instinct," Carter muttered. "He just didn't seem." "Say it." Carter didn't answer. Hayes tapped the folder. "You'll report to the training center on Monday. You'll complete the program. Then we'll evaluate next steps." As Carter stood to leave, Hayes added without looking up, "And Liam, maybe start asking yourself why your instincts were wrong." Meanwhile, in the main conference hall, the second day of presentations had taken on a different tone. Panels that were once focused on predictive maintenance and turbulence sensors now opened with comments about culture, inclusion, and the unspoken hierarchies that govern the aviation industry. The tension wasn't always comfortable, but it was necessary. One panel, titled Cabin and Culture, Who We See at 40,000 Feet, was added last minute. Laura moderated. Rafi sat on the far right of the panel, not as a victim, but as a witness. Also seated, a black female pilot from South Africa, a transgender air traffic controller from Spain, and a retired Latin American ground operations chief. The stories poured out, not all dramatic, but all true. They assumed I was lost in the cockpit. They asked if I was part of the cleaning crew. They joked about real men flying Boeing, not Airbus. By the end of the session, the room felt altered, like cabin pressure after descent, lighter, but fragile. Outside, a small group of aviation students waited with notebooks and shy smiles. One of them, a young man named Luis, Filipino-American, approached Rafi. "My dad made me watch your Alaska decompression video," he said. "That's how you lead." Rafi smiled faintly. "Your dad's got good taste." "But today," Luis hesitated. "I think today taught me something else." "What's that?" Luis straightened. "That silence is not neutral. That if we don't say something, even when it's uncomfortable, we're part of the system that lets it happen again." Rafi didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled a small laminated card from his pocket. An old, worn checklist, his personal pre-flight routine, handwritten decades ago. He handed it to Luis. "Make your own," he said. "But keep one thing at the top." Luis read aloud. "See everyone. Rafi nodded. And never unsee them again. By the third day, the conference was no longer simply a showcase of innovations. It had become a forum of reckoning. Airlines scrambled to reassess their public messaging. Union representatives held impromptu meetings behind soundproof doors. The term bias audit had crept into coffee break conversations between CEOs and regulators. But for Rafi, the whirlwind had less to do with policy than with people. On his hotel room desk sat an envelope, hand-delivered without sender. Inside, a printed screenshot of a message board thread titled, "Let's be honest. Is everyone a victim now?" The comments were anonymous but cutting. So now any minority who gets questioned is a national hero. But if the guy had been white, no one would care. I'm a Blackgate agent, and I check IDs every day. You don't see me crying on LinkedIn. Rafi read each word slowly. Then again, and again. There was no signature, no clue as to who had sent it. But the message was clear. The backlash had begun. He closed the envelope and returned to the window. The city outside moved as if untouched by the discourse raging within its walls. But inside Rafi's chest, something tightened. This wasn't about his pride. It wasn't even about Carter anymore. It was about a system that fought harder to defend its instincts than its facts. He dialed a number. "Hey," he said when Laura answered. "You still want me to go on record?" They met that evening at the hotel bar, which was mercifully half empty. Laura brought a recorder, but no camera crew. Rafi had agreed to speak, but only with his words, not his image. He didn't want his face to be the symbol. He wanted his story to be the mirror. They ordered ginger ale. Laura pressed record. "Let's start with this," she said. "Why now?" Rafi took a long pause before answering. "Because silence isn't neutral," he echoed Louis' words. "And because I don't want the next kid who looks like me to think this is normal. Or worse, acceptable." She leaned in. "Do you believe Officer Carter was racist?" Another pause. "I think he did what a lot of people do. He relied on a script he didn't even know he'd memorized." Laura nodded, recording every word. "What's the real danger here? That people will make this about one man and not the system that built him." Meanwhile, Carter sat across from a new kind of instructor. Her name was Denise Kwan, a civilian specialist in cultural psychology and training. She was younger than him, soft-spoken but firm. Her sessions weren't about guilt. They were about accountability. "You're not on trial," she said plainly. "But you are being asked to look deeper than procedure. Let's start there." "I followed the rules," Carter insisted. "Did the rules tell you to ignore an FAA badge?" "No." "Then you didn't follow the rules. You followed your instinct." Silence. "Where do you think that instinct came from?" "I don't know." "I think you do." Carter's jaw tightened. He looked away. "I didn't want to be wrong. That's all." "And what would wrong have looked like in your mind?" He didn't answer. Denise leaned forward. "You don't have to be a bad person to do harm. You just have to stop questioning the story you've been taught to trust." The fourth day of the conference opened with a moment of silence. Not for a fallen pilot or a lost aircraft, but for the unspoken weight that every marginalized person in the room had carried for years. It wasn't on the agenda. It wasn't publicized. But somehow, by word of mouth, it happened. At 9 a.m., as the first panel prepared to begin, the audience stood. Quiet. Still. Rafi was in the back row. He didn't stand right away. He watched them first. Rows of people from every corner of the industry, eyes forward, heads bowed not out of obligation, but of recognition. Not of him, of something bigger. Then he rose. In that stillness, something shifted. Not a revolution. Not yet. But a tremor deep in the foundation. Later that morning, Rafi was approached by a woman he didn't recognize. Early 40s, blazer, conference badge. "Captain Del Rosario?" "Yes." "My name is Adrian Farrow. I'm the chief of operations for Aegis Airlines." He nodded, cautious. "I wanted to say thank you," she said. "Not just for what you said, for what you made us see." Rafi offered a small smile. "I wasn't trying to start a movement. That's the thing about impact," she replied. "You don't always get to control it." She handed him a card. "If you ever decide to come out of retirement, call me. We're restructuring. Culture first." He accepted the card without promise. But something in him warmed. Across town, Carter sat alone at a cafe, his training session for the day complete. Denise had assigned him a task. Write down the first moment he remembered feeling like someone didn't belong. Not in work. In life. He stared at the blank notepad. Nothing came at first. Then, a memory, so faint it almost felt invented. Third grade. A new kid named Arjun. Brown skin. Accent. At recess, Carter had laughed when someone called him foreign battery. Arjun had smiled weakly, said nothing, and sat alone the rest of the week. Carter had never thought about it again. Until now. He wrote, "Maybe it starts smaller than we think." That night, Rafi sat in his room, packing slowly for his return flight. His phone buzzed. A text from Laura. "Just submitted the piece. It'll go live at midnight. I sent you a draft." He opened the file. The title read, "Not What a Pilot Looks Like. Why Captain Del Rosario's silence spoke louder than any uniform." He scrolled to the end. There, in her final paragraph, she had written, "We often say representation matters. But what we forget is that recognition matters more. And when a man walks into a room built to exclude him and refuses to leave quietly, that recognition becomes revolution." Rafi stared at the words for a long time. Then, for the first time in days, he smiled. The article dropped at midnight. By sunrise, it was being quoted on national news. Laura Stevens' piece ignited something more potent than sympathy. It demanded reflection. Her framing was not angry, not accusatory. It was honest, human. And in that humanity, the world saw itself. Some recoiled. Others awoke. At Lahri Airways headquarters, the boardroom buzzed with urgency. "We need a statement of solidarity," said VP of Public Relations. "With who?" the CFO asked flatly. "With our former chief safety officer." "With Rafi." The room tensed. Not because they disagreed, but because the implications were growing. "He doesn't work here anymore," the COO interjected. "But the world thinks of him as one of ours," PR replied. "And staying silent is a message too." After a beat, the CEO, a composed woman named Miriam Kimura, nodded. "Draft it," she said. "Make it real, not performative." Meanwhile, Officer Carter was summoned to an internal ethics review board. Not a trial, but a reckoning. He sat across from a panel of three, one HR executive, one airport ombudsman, and one civil rights advisor contracted after the incident went viral. "We've reviewed your file," the ombudsman began, "and we've noted both your prior commendations and complaints. The pattern is telling." Carter didn't speak. "What troubles us," the HR officer added, "isn't simply that you made a mistake. It's that you didn't realize it until the world told you." Carter swallowed. "I was wrong," he said quietly. The civil rights advisor, an older black man named Dr. Green, leaned forward. "Then what are you going to do about it?" "I'm trying to understand," Carter replied. "Trying to listen." "Good," Dr. Green said. "Because understanding is an action, not a feeling." In his hotel room, Rafi packed the final items into his carry-on. A knock interrupted. It was Luis, the student he had spoken with days earlier. This time, he held a small paper box. "What's this?" Rafi asked. "A thank you." Inside the box was a lapel pin. Handmade. A miniature golden wing with the initials SE engraved. "See everyone equally," Luis explained. "Some of us are starting a student initiative. You inspired it." Rafi blinked, overcome. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," Luis said. "You already did." That same morning, Carter returned to the airport. Not to report for duty. His suspension remained. But to meet someone. Laura. She had agreed, reluctantly, to see him in person. At first, she thought it was for PR, image management. But when she saw him, without badge, without posture, she sensed something else. "Thank you for agreeing to this," he said. "Let's be clear," she replied. "I'm not here to soften your image. I don't want that." "Then what do you want?" "To understand the weight I put on someone else." Laura studied him. "You can't fix it. I know. But you can stop defending it." He nodded. "I have a daughter," he said suddenly. "She's 13. Mixed. Her mother's Korean American. And I keep thinking, if someone did to her what I did to him, you'd be furious." He nodded again. "I already am." Back in San Francisco, Rafi returned to the stillness of his home. No paparazzi. No reporters. Just the echo of shoes on wood floors, the hum of a fridge, the soft light through the blinds. He placed his bag down and wandered to his study. On the wall, a photo, himself at 28, grinning beside his first captain's badge. Behind him, his parents. His father's hands on his shoulders. His mother wiping away proud tears. He touched the frame gently. They were gone now. But he imagined what they'd say. "Don't apologize for being seen." He sat at the desk and opened a notebook. The pages were blank. He began to write. Not a press statement, not a letter. A curriculum, flight decks and frameworks, inclusion as safety infrastructure. He'd teach again, not in classrooms, in boardrooms, in break rooms, in the in-between places where culture is shaped and assumptions go unchallenged. This was no longer about vindication. It was legacy. That night, Carter sat across from Denise Kwon one last time. "You've completed the course," she said. "But I have one final request." "What is it?" "Apologize. To you. To yourself." He blinked. "For buying into a version of the world where someone had to fit a box to earn your respect." Carter's throat tightened. "How?" "Say it aloud. Here. Now." He swallowed. "I'm sorry," he began, "for not seeing people fully. For assuming protection required suspicion. For hiding behind rules instead of facing my fear of being wrong." Denise smiled faintly. "Now say it to him." Carter stared. "I don't think he'd accept it." "That's not the point." The next morning, as Rafi sipped coffee on his porch, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Captain Del Rosario?" "Yes." "It's Liam Carter." A long pause. I know words won't undo anything, but I want to say I was wrong. Not just about you. About how I see the world. I'm working on it. I just thought you deserved to hear it. From me. Directly." Rafi didn't speak for a moment. Then softly, "Thank you for saying that." Silence again. Then Rafi added, "Keep doing the work." Carter exhaled. "I will." They hung up. Neither felt absolved, but both felt something rare in these times. A beginning. The final day of the conference was unlike any the aviation world had seen. What began as a high-level summit on technical innovations had, by its end, become a case study in moral leadership, systemic reform, and cultural awakening. Rafi arrived early, quietly, and without fanfare. But the room buzzed with awareness the moment he entered. His name had become shorthand, not just for excellence, but for the quiet defiance of expectation. Today's closing keynote had been changed. The original speaker had graciously ceded their slot. The new title, Altitude of Integrity, When Character Charts the Course. As Rafi stepped onto the stage, there was no need for an introduction. The applause that greeted him wasn't just recognition. It was reverence. He looked out at the crowd. Pilots, directors, maintenance engineers, flight attendants, and students, many wearing the small SE pin Louise had introduced days earlier. He stood still for a long moment before speaking. "I was never supposed to be here," he said. The room held its breath. "When I started, they told me I was too quiet, too polite, too small, too brown, too everything." Soft murmurs rippled. "I became a pilot anyway." He smiled. "Then I became their best pilot. Not because I needed to prove them wrong, but because I knew I wasn't." Laughter. Relief. But last week, I was reminded that no number of flight hours can override a single prejudice. That no gold wings pinned to my chest could shield me from the look of doubt, or the pause before belief. He let the silence settle. But I wasn't angry. I was tired. And then, something unexpected happened. He looked out across the rows. "You saw me. And you made sure the world did too. Not just because I was right, but because the way we've been doing things isn't." He clicked his remote. The screen behind him lit up, not with slides, but with a live stream of airports across the globe where employees were holding See Everyone roundtables. Organized in less than 72 hours. "This is the future of aviation," he said. "Not just safety, not just speed, but sight. Seeing one another. Clearly. Fully." The applause was thunderous. And this time, Rafi didn't wave it away. The following week, Liam Carter returned to work. He passed through the employee gates slower than usual. The eyes that met him were mixed, some judgmental, others curious, but none indifferent. In the break room, he spotted a printout on the wall. New policy announcement. Bias Response Protocol Pilot Program, BRP3. Staff training, cultural roundtables, and anonymous reporting channels, effective immediately. At the bottom, a quote in bold. "Understanding is an action." Dr. Green. He sat at the far corner, not expecting anyone to speak to him. Then a young TSA agent named Deshawn nodded his way. "You back?" Carter nodded. "You different?" Another pause. "I'm trying to be." Deshawn stared for a second, then gave a slow nod. "Good." And that was all. But for Carter, it was enough. That same day, Laura's feature on the power of recognition was nominated for a National Journalism Award. She declined interviews. choosing instead to keep the focus on the movement rather than the reporter. She received thousands of messages from readers, most grateful, some skeptical, a few angry. One stood out. It came from a former pilot who had left the industry after years of being second-guessed. I almost gave up believing we could change. This story gave me a reason to believe again. As for Rafi, he accepted an offer, not to fly again, but to design a new training module to be implemented across major airline alliances. Title: Human Factors, Beyond the Cockpit. His curriculum included simulations not just for emergency procedures, but for emotional intelligence, inclusive leadership, and what he called silent scanning, the art of noticing what we fail to acknowledge. Luis and his fellow students became the first cohort to beta test the module. Rafi made them co-authors. "It's your sky too," he told them. "You should help shape the maps." 1 year later, Rafi stood at Gate 27 of San Francisco International, not to fly, but to greet. A new cohort of trainees had just arrived to begin their cultural intelligence module. Among them, engineers, flight instructors, and airport personnel. Each wore a small pin with golden wings and the letters SE. A plaque beside the training center door read, "The Rafael del Rosario Center for Inclusive Aviation Leadership." He didn't ask for his name to be on the wall, but they insisted. Inside, framed on the far wall, hung the image of him on stage, mid-speech, with the caption, "True altitude begins when we see each other." At home, on his desk, lay a sealed envelope. The return address read, L. Carter. Inside, a folded note. "Captain Del Rosario, I wanted you to know, I've joined the initiative. Not to be redeemed, but to repair. I'm mentoring 2 new officers now, and the first thing I teach them is to pause. Not for suspicion, but for reflection. Thank you for the lesson, and for your patience. With humility, Liam Carter." Rafi placed the letter beside the one his father had written him when he earned his first wings. Then he stood at the window again. Planes roared overhead. Each one, a promise that the sky belongs to all of us. No matter the uniform, no matter the face, no matter who dares to doubt it. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. Big kiss, and see you in the next story.